Hi, good afternoon, students. So, what I wanted to spend some time talking with you about today in Module 4 is the introduction to what's called the cost of productions. And a few things that I wanted to highlight for you to really solidify and concretize your understanding going into this module because it will be important for you to understand the graphs that are going to be presented to you. The first distinction that we need to make is one between explicit costs and implicit costs. Explicit costs refer to what are commonly called accounting costs. And these are items that any firm can easily measure. For example, they show up on a firm's income statements, a firm's balance sheet, and they'll also show up on a firm's statement of cash flows. They are things which are, in many cases, tangible. They may be products, materials that the firm has purchased in order to produce its final product. It could be hiring contracts or contractors in order to expense out that labor to a third party entity. But nevertheless, these represent explicit costs, which again can sometimes just be referred to as accounting costs because they are things that are, for lack of a better word, more or less tangible or easily measurable. That is distinguished in your text, and I want to make the distinction here between what are called implicit costs, which sometimes and very often are referred to economic costs. Unsurprisingly, given that this is a microeconomics class, we will be spending our focus this week and in the materials provided to you, focusing on these economic costs. The charts and graphs that are going to be presented to you are measuring their variables from an economic cost perspective. And these are things that are admittedly much more difficult to measure because they require an evaluation of opportunity cost, which is not necessarily easy information for a firm to access, because in order to measure a firm's opportunity cost, if we go back to the definition of opportunity cost, which is the very next available alternative, measuring economic cost requires the firm to ask, could I be better off doing, selling, producing something else, anything else? And so that admittedly requires the firm to have access to quite a bit of information that it may or may not be able to easily access. So that's the first distinction that I want to make for you, is between this point of explicit cost, which again is very easy to conceptualize, versus implicit cost, which requires a good deal more creative thinking. It also requires that we have a lot more assumptions when we are measuring and proposing and plotting charts and graphs to kind of conceptualize and concretize our charts and graphs and designs and economic theories. Now, within, excuse me, within the realm of explicit costs are the categories of fixed costs and variable costs. Fixed costs do not change as production or manufacturing changes. These costs remain a constant specified rate, regardless of how production looks or is increasing or potentially could be decreasing. Examples of fixed cost, classic examples, would be like the rent for the building or the land which you're occupying. More broadly, could be any sort of startup cost. So if you have to, let's say you're going into business to make a bakery. The fixed cost in that example, just very quickly, would be the building itself, the counters and the tables and the chairs, all of that you could certainly wrap into your startup costs. It would also include the oven, right? It would include any sort of mixers or bowls or utensils. All of those items are going, which we would call startup costs, are going to be folded into the broader umbrella term of fixed costs. Now, graphically, when you're looking at these charts, particularly when you're looking at the um, average cost curve, you will notice that the average cost curve starts very, very high and then proceeds to gradually decrease. The reason for this is at the first unit, at the first cake that is made, the average cost of production is extraordinarily high because these fixed costs are extraordinarily high relative to the amount that is being produced. However, as production increases, the amount those fixed costs represent relative to the amount of production that has now increased dramatically falls. So fixed costs start very high and then they slowly decrease in this kind of gentle parabolic shape. The other type of explicit cost that you're going to see is that of variable costs. These are costs that do change as production or manufacturing changes. This would be the cost of materials, the cost of labor, any type of shipping, any type of utilities, water, electricity. Going back to the bakery example, if I am baking more cakes or cupcakes or any type of pastry, that's going to require more water use. That's going to require me to use the oven for more hours. That's going to require more electricity. If I am delivering, right, the car itself would represent a fixed cost. The vehicle would represent a fixed cost, but the mileage, the maintenance, the oil change, the gasoline, the fuel costs, the tire changes, the rotations, any sort of other maintenance. Let's say the AC goes out. And if you live in the South like I do, you can't have a vehicle without AC. It's just not doable. All of that represents a variable cost. Now, if you are interested in a funny example that is an embedded joke, I want you to hop over to the announcement that I normally follow with this video or pair with this video each week. And I'm going to provide you a link to a scene in a very famous TV show that kind of makes a mockery of a MBA's students' failure to understand the difference between variable costs and fixed costs. I'm not going to give away too much, but know that the joke of the scene that I have linked and given to you in my other announcement, the joke there is that this character, who is supposed to be Boy Wonder, fundamentally does not understand, as an MBA student, does not understand fixed costs and variable costs and the catastrophic disaster that leads to in the startup paper company that he is attempting to help make successful. And that's all I'll say about that. Graphically, your variable costs start very low, right? Because if you're only running the oven for an hour, if the lights in the bakery are only on for an hour, then the cost, the bill, which you as the bakery owner and operator will receive, will be very low. However, as you continue production and as that oven stays on for 8, 10, 12, 16 hours a day, assuming it's a 50 amp plug, that is going to pull a lot of electricity, and that is going to dramatically increase your costs, your variable cost curve. as that production increases and as it changes. Graphically, your variable cost curve is fundamentally represented by your marginal cost curve, which again starts off very, very low, but then you'll notice continues to increase and increase and increase. And eventually, at a certain point, at least in economic theory, becomes perfectly vertical, as the cost of producing one more unit or one more good just becomes too much for the business to bear. So I hope you found this video instructive and insightful. And always feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I am always happy and ready and willing to assist you. Have a great week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.